Today I'm going to give you a quick overview of ancient Egypt, both its mythology as well as its history. So I'll be showing you a family tree of the main Egyptian gods, but I'll also be talking about some of the most important historical pharaohs, and I'll be showing you where they fit on the timeline. We'll also be looking at a map of ancient Egypt, the 12 largest pyramids, and of course, the famous Egyptian hieroglyphic writing system. Throughout the video, I'll be using my Ancient Egypt History and Mythology chart, which can be purchased as a poster from my website, usefulcharts.com. We're going to start by looking at the timeline. The first thing you need to know about ancient Egyptian history is that it is divided into 31 numbered dynasties. So this is what the numbers represent on the timeline. For example, if you want to know when the 4th dynasty of Egypt was, the answer is between approximately 2600 BCE and 2500 BCE. The second thing you need to know is that there were 3 times throughout ancient Egyptian history in which Egypt really flourished. These are called the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom, and they are shown on the chart in red, purple, and blue. In between and after these kingdoms, there were 3 intermediate periods in which Egypt was in decline. Okay, the next thing I want to show you is the map. The most important thing to notice here is that there are actually 2 Egypts, Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt. At first, it might seem strange that Lower Egypt is at the top and Upper Egypt is at the bottom. But this is because the terms refer to their placement along the Nile River. The river flows north, so Lower Egypt is located downstream and Upper Egypt is located upstream. Originally, Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt were 2 separate kingdoms. The pharaohs from Lower Egypt wore a red crown that looked like this, and the pharaohs from Upper Egypt wore a white crown that looked like this. However, when the 2 kingdoms were united, a combined crown was created. So the next time you see a picture of a rock carving from Egypt, pay attention to the headwear. You'll notice that you see this double crown displayed a lot. The main city in Lower Egypt was Memphis, located near modern-day Cairo. Most of the large pyramids that we associate with ancient Egypt are located in this area. The main city in Upper Egypt was Thebes, near modern-day Luxor. You won't find any pyramids near Luxor, however, this is the area in which the famous Valley of the Kings is located, where King Tut's tomb was found. Okay, so now that you understand the basics about the time periods and the geography involved, let's go back to the timeline so that I can give you a walkthrough of ancient Egyptian history in chronological order. The first dynasty started around 3100 BCE. Everything before this is considered the pre-dynastic period. The first dynasty started when a pharaoh named Narmer, or Menes, united Lower and Upper Egypt for the first time. But during the first 2 dynasties, ancient Egypt was still in its infancy. It wasn't until the 3rd dynasty that things really took off. The 3rd dynasty marked the beginning of the Old Kingdom, which lasted through to the end of the 6th dynasty. The Old Kingdom was centered on Lower Egypt, and it was the period during which the largest and most famous pyramids were built. The first of these was built for a pharaoh named Djoser, and was designed by an architect named Imhotep. To the right of the timeline is a chart showing the 12 largest pyramids in order. The Pyramid of Djoser came in at number 11, but about 50 years later we get a pharaoh named Sneferu, who founded the 4th dynasty, the most important of the Old Kingdom dynasties. Sneferu built 3 major pyramids, which come in at numbers 3, 4, and 5. They are the Red Pyramid, the Bent Pyramid, and the Meidum Pyramid, also known as the collapsed pyramid, as it, collapsed, and only the inner portion can be seen today. At this point, let's go down to the bottom of the chart, where I have some family tree diagrams. You can see here that Sneferu was the father of Khufu, who was the builder of the largest pyramid of all, the Great Pyramid at Giza. Khufu was followed by two of his sons, both of whom also built large pyramids. However, only the Pyramid of Khafre exists today. The Pyramid of Djedefre is known as the Lost Pyramid and was either never finished or was perhaps destroyed at some later point. The dynasty continued through Khafre and his son Menkaura. Menkaura started to build his own pyramid, but it was actually finished by his son Shepseskef. If we go back up to the pyramid photos, you can see the various pyramids that I just mentioned. So the Great Pyramid of Khufu comes in at number 1, with an original height of about 480 feet. That's about the height of a 50-story building. The Pyramid of Khafre, which is located right next to Khufu's, is just a little bit shorter. However, it stands out because it's the one that is right behind the Sphinx. The Sphinx is, of course, one of the most interesting statues in the ancient world, and there are all sorts of crazy theories about it. However, according to mainstream historians, it was simply built by the same pharaoh who built the pyramid right next to it, Khafre. The third of the three pyramids at Giza is the one that Khafre's son Menkaure started to build, and which was finished by his son Shepseskef. It's about half the size of the other two Giza pyramids and comes in at number 9. That lost pyramid I mentioned earlier, built by Khafre's older brother Djedefre, was likely around the same size as the Menkaure pyramid, so I've placed it on the chart at number 10. Okay, let's now return to the timeline. Around the year 2200 BCE, a major climate event occurred known as the 4.2 kiloyear event. It caused super dry conditions worldwide, and this is probably what caused the fall of the Old Kingdom. At this point, Egypt experienced its first intermediate period, during which Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt eventually split. But the two kingdoms were united again by a pharaoh named Menuhotep II of the 11th dynasty, and thus the Middle Kingdom was born, which lasted through to the end of the 13th dynasty. Of the three Middle Kingdom dynasties, the 12th is the most important. It was during the 12th dynasty that pyramid building resumed. However, the Middle Kingdom pyramids weren't able to rival those of the Old Kingdom, and in fact, most of them are in pretty bad shape today. The largest are the pyramids of Senusret III and Amenemhat III, which come in at numbers 6 and 7. The Middle Kingdom came to an end around 1700 BCE, when the two Egypts split up once again. It was during this second intermediate period that a foreign people group from West Asia entered Egypt and took control. They are known as the Hyksos, and they ruled Lower Egypt as the 15th dynasty. However, Pharaoh Ahmose I, founder of the 18th dynasty, was eventually able to expel the foreign Hyksos, reunite Egypt, and establish the new kingdom, centered on Thebes in Upper Egypt. The new kingdom was the greatest of the three ancient Egyptian kingdoms, and is sometimes referred to as the Egyptian Empire, since it was during the New Kingdom that Egypt reached its peak in terms of its size, power, and influence. In fact, most of the pharaohs whose names are still well known today, such as Thutmose, Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and Ramses, are New Kingdom pharaohs, coming from either the 18th or the 19th dynasties. I've already done a video covering the family tree of the New Kingdom pharaohs, so I won't go through that again, but if you're interested in seeing it, you can find a link in the description. For now, let's quickly finish looking at the timeline. The New Kingdom came to an end around 1100 BCE, which is about the same time as the Bronze Age collapse, an event which saw the demise of the Mycenaean Greeks as well. At this point, Egypt starts to frequently become ruled by foreign powers, such as the Libyan pharaohs of Dynasty 21 and the Kushite, or so-called Black Pharaohs of Dynasty 25. It then fights several wars with both Assyria and Babylon, only to be defeated in the end by the Achaemenid Persians, who are Dynasties 27 and 31. The numbered dynasties come to an end in the year 332 BCE, when Alexander the Great conquered Egypt. Shortly thereafter, Egypt ended up being controlled by the Ptolemies, which ruled until the time of Cleopatra, after which Egypt becomes part of the Roman Empire. So keep in mind that the history of ancient Egypt is really long, about 3,000 years. It is often pointed out that Cleopatra is closer in time to us today than she is to the pharaohs who built the Great Pyramids at Giza. Amazing. I should also point out that we have a separate video covering the family tree of the Ptolemaic dynasty. So if you want to check that out, that link is also in the description. Okay, that covers the history of ancient Egypt. I now want to talk a little bit about its mythology. But before I begin, I need to make a really important point. As I just mentioned, the history of ancient Egypt spans about 3,000 years. And although we tend to consider it as a single civilization, it didn't actually always have a single unified culture. Because of this, there is no one correct way to arrange the ancient Egyptian gods into a family tree chart. What I'm about to show you is just one of the many ways that the gods were understood to relate to one another. So, for example, in Memphis, these three gods were the most important. I've shown them in red to match with Lower Egypt on the map and with the Old Kingdom on the timeline. In this triad, there was a father, mother, and child. The father was Ptah, the god of craftsmanship. This makes sense because Lower Egypt is the place where all the big pyramids are. His consort was Sekhmet, the goddess of healing, and together they were the parents of Nefertim, the god of beauty, although sometimes his mother is said to be Sekhmet's sister, Bastet. She's the goddess with the head of a cat. In Thebes, however, a different triad of gods was worshipped. I've shown them in blue to match with Upper Egypt on the map and with the New Kingdom on the timeline. In the Theban Triad, the father was Amun, who was later associated with Ra, the sun god. His consort was the great mother Mut, and together they were the parents of Khonsu, the moon god. So these two triads were associated with Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt, respectively. However, eventually a group of 9 gods, known as the Ennead, Enea being the Greek word for the number 9, became the main set of gods for all of Egypt. At the top was Ra, the king of the gods and the main god of the sun. His center of worship was in a city near Memphis, which the Greeks later called Heliopolis, city of the sun. Ra took many forms. As I already mentioned, he was sometimes Amun-Ra, associated with the main Theban god Amun. But he was also sometimes Khepri, the god of the morning sun, and Atum, the god of the evening sun. Ra was the father of Shu and Tefnut, god of the wind and goddess of the rain. Together, they were the parents of Geb and Nut, god of the earth and goddess of the sky. Note that in European mythologies, earth is usually a mother and the sky is usually a father. But in Egypt, this is reversed. Together, Geb and Nut were the parents of Isis, Osiris, Nephthys, and Set. Other than Ra, Osiris is probably the best-known Egyptian god. This is because he was associated with the afterlife, and the Egyptians were really interested in the afterlife. They, of course, are well known for carefully wrapping the dead in the form of mummies for preservation. Osiris is the main character in Egyptian mythology's most famous story, which is simply called the Osiris myth. According to that story, Osiris was the first pharaoh of Egypt, but at some point he was murdered by his brother Set, who then usurped the throne. At this point, Osiris's wife, who was named Isis, traveled to the afterlife to try and rescue him. She wasn't able to bring him back to life. However, she was able to have a child with him, who was named Horus. Once Horus became an adult, he avenged his father by killing Set and reclaimed the throne. This is why he later became known as the god of kingship. And in fact, he became so popular that he was eventually considered to be the same being as the main god, Ra. So within the Egyptian pantheon, Isis is generally known as the goddess of motherhood, and Osiris as the god of the afterlife. Set, however, became more of a dark figure and was known as the god of storms and the desert, as well as disorder and violence. Sometimes his sister Nephthys, the goddess of funerals, was seen as his wife, but sometimes she was seen as the second wife of Osiris. She was also the mother of Anubis by either Osiris or Set. Anubis was the god who weighed a person's soul after death. According to the Egyptians, if a person's soul weighed more than an ostrich feather, which was actually the goddess Ma'at, that person would then be devoured by the female demon Amit. Horus had a wife named Hathor, who was the goddess of love. Together, they were said to have 4 children, who were associated with the 4 points of the compass, as well as 4 organs of the body. There are a couple of more things I want to point out about this part of the chart. Like I keep saying, these gods were understood in a bunch of different ways. However, one way in which they can all be placed on a single family tree is the way that I've shown here. So you'll notice that at the very top is a primordial god called Nun, and a goddess named Mehet Wehet. Together, they are sometimes said to be the parents of Ra, as well as of Khnum, the source of the Nile River, and of Neith, the goddess of war and hunting. Among her children was a very important god named Thoth, the god of knowledge. Okay, so I'm not able to point out every god, but these are the main ones. The final thing I want to talk about is hieroglyphs, which is the writing system used by the ancient Egyptians and, together with Sumerian cuneiform, the earliest true writing system created by humans. Now, on this chart, you can see some of the many hieroglyphic symbols together with the approximate sound they represented. But don't misunderstand. Although some symbols eventually did come to represent a single sound, most hieroglyphic symbols do not represent a single sound. There are hundreds of them, and usually they represent 2 or 3 sounds grouped together, or sometimes even an entire word, like the examples shown here. The symbols for single sounds were mostly used for spelling out proper names. In these cases, they were placed in a rounded box called a cartouche, and I've given you a few examples here. Okay, so that was just a very brief overview of ancient Egypt's history and mythology. Once again, if you'd like to purchase a copy of the poster, you can head over to my website, usefulcharts.com. Thanks for watching.